Hi, everyone. I'm back. I'm so thrilled to introduce the Dean of Columbia College, James Valentini, or as we affectionately call him here, Dean Teeny. Dean Valentini is a professor in the chemistry department of the college, but I know I speak for everyone at Columbia College when I say he is so much more than just someone who teaches in a classroom. He is the person who plays with us in the snow or on snowball fights. He leads us with just so much inspiration and motivation for the people around us, and he is the best type of teacher because he is always inspiring and motivating the people around him. So I'm so thrilled to introduce Dean Valentini, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and congratulations to you, and welcome all. It's been an exciting day, and we have a wonderful capstone experience. As Sarah said, I'm Jim Valentini. I'm the Dean of Columbia College. Slightly impaired today due to an athletic injury, but not so impaired that I won't be able to answer the questions. Anyway, we have as our guest Marco Zappacosta, Columbia College class of 2007 and co-founder of Thumbtack. Marco, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Dean. Thanks for having me.
So you've been interviewed many times, and our audience can view those videos online, of videos of those interviews. So I'd like to do something a little bit more Columbia College specific today. Why did you choose to come to Columbia College, and what did you want to study and do?
Yeah, I've never been asked that before in an interview, so I'm happy to do something new. So I went on a college trip with a buddy my junior year, and we went sort of up and down the East Coast. And actually, I'd never been to New York City before. We spent 2 days here, one night at Columbia and one night here, and we stayed with a sort of friend from this sort of area, Jim Campbell. We stayed on his floor, and I just fell in love, first with New York and then with Columbia. And so I applied early, and you guys let me in, and that was that. And what attracted me was...
And one of the best decisions we ever made.
Yeah, it was mutual. I loved it here. And it was a combination of the city, the core program. I wanted to be a sort of neuroscience and behavior major and be a research scientist. And so that really attracted me. And then I think it was the sort of the self-selecting aspect of people who are sort of curious to be in a big city really appealed to me.
Cool, wonderful. So on Monday evening, Columbia College students know we're going to introduce them to a new thing called My Columbia College Journey. It's about focusing on your Columbia College experience in a different way, and it emphasizes self-awareness and self-reflection. Marco, how important in being successful do you think self-awareness is?
Have you ever heard the phrase, business is easy, people are hard? But I actually think the limiting scaling factor of a startup is probably first and foremost whether you're solving a real problem, but assuming you've crossed that threshold, it becomes people and trust and respect and how effectively this group can gel and work together. And I think as a leader, the primary sort of area of development is learning about yourself. How you come off, your strengths, your weaknesses, in what ways are you effective at persuading people, or in what ways are you ineffective. And it's a very hard process. I mean, standing in front of the mirror doesn't always feel good. Standing on that scale doesn't always tell you what you want to hear. But you have to really engage with that, because that's the only way that you can, I think, learn about yourself and then get better.
So what part of your own Columbia College experience was most significant, and what about it is most memorable to you?
I mean, it was the people, the friends I made. I mean, even tonight, 3 of us are going to meet back up for dinner, and my freshman and sophomore college roommate, another guy who was on our floor, and a 4th guy who we befriended, and these people have become just so important to me. And so I went to the same preschool through 12th grade, and it's this weird thing where I hang out with guys I went to preschool with, and I love them to death, but I didn't really choose them. Our parents sort of chose for us by sending us to the school, and like family, sort of like the shared history is the common bond. But at Columbia, there was much more of a self-selection aspect that brought us together, and so these are people who were very much like me, interested in sort of exploring a big city and learning new ideas, and that is something that I cherish, getting to meet these great people. I learned a thing or two, I think, kind of, but most of all, it's the people.
So were any of your classes or any of your instructors particularly influential in your choices?
Well, there was this one course freshman year. I took introductory chemistry with Dean Valentini, which was a blast. Though actually, the memory I have from your class is in the final realizing that one of my friends had slipped through his alarm and wasn't there, and frantically trying to call him to get him there. I think I took a class freshman year that was about the evolution of intelligence and consciousness. And it really opened my eyes to cognitive science as a discipline, and the fact that sort of our brain and all the sort of behavioral aspects that come from this system, and that has evolved over time, and we can study it like engineers and decompose it and learn how it works. And that was immensely thrilling. I actually think if I went back to Columbia again, I would be a history of science major. My other favorite class was the history and philosophy of evolutionary biology. And it was so fun to read the history of how we sort of came to grips with this concept, and in what ways it was sort of heralded, and in what ways it was sort of pushed back against. Actually, I would love to spend more time studying that.
You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
We can't give you another degree. The university doesn't allow us to do that,
Yeah,
but you're welcome back anytime. So you've just described several different science classes. So science involves having an idea, hypothesis, testing it out. Entrepreneurs have ideas and test them out. How does your scientific training influence your work?
So I think the metaphor that is most often used for entrepreneurship is wrong, and that is discovery. Is invention. We have this idea of the sort of inventor who has a spark of genius, and they create a social network or this technology or this or that. But I think the appropriate metaphor is actually discovery. And when you think of it that way, you put it inside of the same construct of the scientific method. Because I'm sure many of you have heard things like lean startup methodology or customer-driven development. In my mind, those are just gussied up ways of saying the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you run an experiment, and you're able to sort of learn something. Maybe you reject the hypothesis or you prove it, but either way, you've learned something. And I think that's how you chart a path through the unknown. You have to build it up from a set of priors and use experiments to refine your thinking over time. We as a company have a value that's reason from first principles. And we think that is key to being able to be bold and have the sort of courage in our own conviction. It's not because we're just randomly trying things. It's because we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. We've run experiments that have given us some insight, and through that, we apply our creativity to come up with this new idea. And I think that is what entrepreneurship and innovation is all about. It's a process of discovery, which actually I think says something else about sort of technology, which is that I really think these ideas that sort of hit it big are independent of their inventors. What I mean by that is, regardless of whether Larry and Sergey started a search engine, we would have had a search engine available to all of us that used the link graph as a primary way of rating content. That was fundamentally the best way to do it, and it was just waiting to be discovered. Similarly, with a social network that is supported by real identities online where genuine communities can emerge, that was going to happen. The accident of history was that it was Zuck. And I'm not trying to take anything away from these people. It takes an enormous amount of hard work and creativity, but it highlights the fact that these things, I think, are lurking out there, these sort of big ideas waiting to sort of impact a huge swath of the economy or these communities, and it's about discovering them. And I think that also makes it more accessible. I think when you frame it in terms of innovation and having this brilliant stroke of genius, it's too easy to say, oh, well, I'm not that smart. I'm no genius, I can't do that. But discovery is something we can all sort of practice and learn.
Very well put. Did you ever have a job either in college or before you went to college that taught you a lesson that you still use in business?
So the first job I was paid for, it was in middle school. I was an assistant at a soccer summer camp. And what I didn't know, one of my middle school coaches got me into it, was that the students were all high schoolers.
So you were teaching people or
Yeah,
responsible
and I
people
was, like,
older than you.
assisting and helping. I wasn't like the main coach, but it was this this a little intimidating thing for these high schoolers to sort of be like who you're sort of telling where to go, but realizing that you can kind of fake it and people will listen to you. You know, if you sort of have the sort of audacity to say, oh yeah, we got to go over there now, or no, stop doing that, we got to do this, people will kind of listen. And it was a very helpful thing to learn early on.
I'll try faking that as dean,
Yeah.
see if it works. On class day in 2007 when you graduated, what did you think you would be doing 10 years later?
So, despite my mother's pleas for not doing this, I actually took a semester off from college. So first semester junior year, I took off to work with this guy who I'd met because we had a shared passion. Like many 20-year-olds, we got into Social Security reform, pension reform. And I wrote 2 op-eds for the spec about it. I met him, and he actually had started a student advocacy group that was involved in the Social Security debate. And I don't really know why I worked so hard to convince my parents to let me do this, but I was just excited to go and try and make a change and sort of do it. Now, if you guys all know how that one ended up, you know that we had 0 impact on the national debate, but it was there that we realized how fun it was to build something out of nothing and rally people around a shared dream, and so we decided to do it again. So I would have said, or I would have hoped, rather, that I would be working with, this guy, Jonathan, my co-founder, starting some company. We ended up actually living together for a summer because I graduated in December of 2007 to make up for that semester. I had sort of one last internship summer, and we lived together, and we spent that summer sort of coming up with ideas and trying to sort of think of something, and Thumbtack was the second idea we came up with, but the vastly better one, and we're still at it.
So I've said, or Columbia College students here know that I've said to them many times that entrepreneurship is just an idea meets an opportunity and it's turned into an enterprise. Is that actually a good description?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that it is, you don't even need to have an idea up front. Like we really didn't. And this, I think, gets a little bit shortchanged as a path for building a business. We literally said to ourselves, what is the biggest problem we think we can solve with technology? And secondly, what's a problem that we think will inevitably be solved? We went hunting for that problem, but we were excited to sort of find something and work on it. So sometimes you don't even need that. And look, that path has some notable outcomes, like Amazon was started that way. Microsoft was started that way. Sometimes you figure that there's like, hey, there's got to be some opportunity out here. Like, we're just going to go chip away at it and find something to do. So I think it really just takes a desire. And just to be very crisp about this, entrepreneurship does not mean building a tech company, does not mean raising venture capital. You know, we as a platform support hundreds of thousands of small businesses around the country, and I consider them all entrepreneurs as well. It's simply about making something out of nothing. And that can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes.
So it's really discovery is really.
I think so.
Much more, the ideas and opportunities are to be discovered. You just have to be looking.
Yep.
So we need discoverers is what we need. So I also say to students many times that we all have to learn to be open to failure and to recognize its value. As a person who's failed many times in life, I've had a lot of experience with that. Former president, of course, Simon Schwartz, said to me, "Oh, Dean Valentini, we never use the word failure, we use the word pivot." Could you comment on that?
So I think you have to just embrace failure as a learning opportunity. If you aren't failing, you aren't sort of swinging hard enough, you aren't trying to go big enough, you aren't trying to go fast enough, and it's just learning about the contours of what's possible. And I think that's exactly right. You sort of run into a wall and then you turn 90 degrees and walk the other way. And that is something that you just have to get excited about. The people I see who burn out sort of building companies or sort of being inside of startups is because they get obsessed with the product they are building rather than the process of building it or the sort of impact that is having. You have to have something that sort of everlasting sustain you. Otherwise, you're going to get bored and want to move on.
So one can find inspirational posters and read lots of places the phrase "culture is everything." What is the culture at Thumbtack, and how do you build a culture, starting with you and a partner, and how do you maintain it as an enterprise grows?
Yeah, I strongly agree with that statement. So first off, you have to define what culture is. In my mind, there are two broad aspects of it. The first is values, the things that help orient people to help them make decisions and make trade-offs. And the second thing are habits, how you bring those values to life. The stark difference between the two is that the values should stay the same, even as the company grows and evolves, while the habits have to change, because what's right for 10 people is going to be wrong for 100. And so the question then is, like, how do you set those values? I would argue that culture is an emergent phenomenon from the sort of self-selection that brings together the first 5, 10, 15 people. And it is not early on an engineered thing. It is simply an outcome of these random people, not random, but something that brought these people together that you actually probably aren't self-aware of. So the first thing we did in sort of helping codify our culture was to look inside of us and say, hey, what do we think is unique? Not necessarily good or better than others, just simply differentiating about us. What do we like about us? And what do we want to sort of put on a pedestal and celebrate and support going forward? And we did that as a team of maybe 30, 35 at the time, is I think the first time we really codified it. And then later in our history, at this point we're probably 100 or 150 people, we said, all right, let's revisit these values and think not just about what brought us here, but what do we need to sort of get to where we want to go. And at that point, 5 years, 6 years into it, it became much more of an engineered thing. And for us, those values there's 4 of them. First one is know your customer. At the end of the day, we're in the business of serving our customers, and they're the boss. So in our org chart, I'm at the bottom and they're at the top. And what we celebrate is learning about them so that we can serve them. The second one is reason from first principles, which is all about applying the scientific method to figure out our own way forward, our path, our map. The third one is make each other better. And that's all about the fact that startups are hard. And the odds are stacked against you. And so the only way that you have a shot of success is if you work to bring the best out of every individual and team and the company as a whole. And that takes work, and you have to sort of support that. And then the last one is go, where we have limited time, limited money, and we got to make the most of it, which is actually less about hours and much more about saying no to mediocre ideas or even good ideas so that you can save your time and effort for the great ideas. I think that is really where leverage comes from. So we look to find people who I think many of whom would be in this audience today, because I think Columbia attracts a similar type of person, who are curious, who are team motivated and team success motivated rather than ego motivated, who are ambitious, and we have sort of a whole process to evaluate people on this front, and I think it's one of the things that has sustained us for as long as we had and supported our success.
So Ben Horowitz, who's another Columbia College grad and a university trustee, wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And in it, one of the things he talks about as being among the really hard things is hiring people who aren't exactly like you. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, one's trying to maintain a culture, but you don't want to have everyone be exactly the same. How does one balance that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think first off, you got to remember you're not hiring friends. You're not like looking for people to hang out with. I actually don't like the test of like, would I want to hang out with this person on a Sunday? It's like, no. Sundays are for family and friends. This person may not be in that club. They're about a colleague. And so I think what you have to look for is specific outputs, a talent, skill, attribute, characteristic, however you want to call it, that you think is necessary for being successful at the company, and then ignoring their background, their specific history that may have brought them to you. Because at the end of the day, if they have those output characteristics, you found the right person. Doesn't matter what path they may have been on to get from here to there, and it need not matter if they look like you or sound like you or maybe would even be the person you'd hang out with on a weekend. you have to, I think the only way to really eliminate bias from the hiring process is by being very explicit about what you're looking for and standardizing the evaluation process to try and really get at that in a as objective as possible way, knowing that, obviously it is not a totally objective process.
So I'm gonna ask this question, though I think you've already answered it, and I'll give you an opportunity to elaborate it in terms of a particular word. So I talk to students a lot about empathy being one of the most important attributes and attitudes one can have, empathy being different from sympathy, empathy meaning understanding other people. Am I emphasizing that right?
I think so. I think that's exactly right. And the distinction I usually make, which is similar to yours, is intellectual versus emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is often what causes you to feel for somebody and is the sort of that cause of sympathy. You can put yourself in their shoes and then you're like, oh my God, they're suffering or they're happy, and you feel for them. That is useful, but not actually the important part of it. I think the intellectual empathy is the important part, where you can put yourself in the shoes of another to reason about what they would want or what they would need. And it's often talked about a necessary component for sort of customer development and thinking about them, but I actually think it's even more important as a manager. At the end of the day, a manager needs to be good at two things. One is predicting how people are going to react to something, and then being proactive about ensuring that that doesn't cause problems. And the first one is all about empathy. It's like, I know the dean really likes to hear about such changes before they get announced to everybody. Let's make sure he gets that email first. And it's just putting yourself in the shoes of everybody and walking down the list and then doing the work to help mitigate any of the concerns. So I think empathy, particularly that intellectual empathy of being able to sort of reason from their point of view, is fundamental across the board.
There's a kind of an expansion or extension of the concept. We emphasize to students global awareness, global understanding. It really is about understanding people who have a different cultural background than you do. You have family in Italy, and you've spent time at Chieti, I believe. How has that provided you a kind of global awareness?
Well, not to bring it full circle, but it's what I wrote my college entrance exam on.
Oh, one thing I didn't check before this interview.
That's fine. So my parents are both Italian. They came to the U.S. in 1976 thinking they'd stay for a few years, and they're still there. And so we grew up, and the way I described it to people is that I'm domestically Italian and socially American. So like my concept of a house and a family and that whole dynamic is very Italian, but like how I interact with friends and sort of my worldview outside the home is very American. And I think what was so helpful or so privileged about seeing both sides is that it gives you perspective. And I'd go hang out with all my cousins in Italy who were effectively the same as me, just born in a different country, and they had radically different points of views and habits and sort of interests, and you just realize, man, it's a big world, and my point of view is one among many, and you should always remember that. And so I don't think it was something my parents sort of like set out to do, but it was just the exposure that I got sort of gave me that perspective, which in hindsight I'm very thankful for.
Yeah. So you mentioned family, which is a good lead into telling people you're about to become a father for the first time.
Couple weeks.
How does your entrepreneurial experience influence the way you think about it and becoming a parent and starting a family and now a new generation?
Well, my wife will often chide me. I will use the sort of plural pronoun we to mean both me and Thumbtack and me and her. And she will often have to ask, wait, which we are you referring to right now? And so I feel like Thumbtack is in many ways like this thing that we have birthed and we've raised. It is sort of an organism, and I can control it sort of, but actually the bigger and older it gets, the less actual power I have to make it do what I want. And so it has been one of the best things ever. I'm really excited to be a dad, and I'm excited to just sort of help this little kid sort of figure their own way through this world. And Yeah, I think it's going to be awesome. I honestly think it's going to give me, will put Thumbtack into perspective as well. You know, you can get caught up in your own stuff a little too much when you sort of have your own company and you're working really hard on this thing. You can at times see that as the whole entire world, which is helpful. It helps you work hard and pay attention to what's going on. But there are times where that probably is unhealthy or gets taken too far. So I'm excited for this little human to not care at all about my work and to be interested in her own things that distract me from all that.
Columbia College class of 2040.
Yeah, that's right. That's terrifying. 2040. Oh, I hadn't added that up yet. Wow.
Yes. So, yes, it adds up. Yeah. Yes. So the Columbia College Alumni Association website has a page titled Distinguished Alumni. There are 101 people on that list, and they're listed alphabetically. You're the last one listed alphabetically. You're also the youngest. How does that make you feel?
So I don't know if you guys have seen this list. I think I would also be at the end if it was, in terms of like notoriety. My mother actually, when I forwarded it to her, she said, "Are you sure they haven't made a mistake?" Which gives you a sense of the type of mother I have. So I'm very proud, but I think most of all, it's exciting. I looked a lot of these people up on Wikipedia, and some but many you didn't. And it's awesome to be in the company of all these people, and it was exciting to be on that list. So thank you very much.
That's very good. Another one of the people who appeared at Startup Columbia today, George Yankopoulos, is also on that list. What could someone tweet about you that would make you the proudest?
So I think something that I'm very proud of is the impact that we get to have. So Thumbtack is a platform that helps customers hire professionals, caterers, tutors, any and all local professionals. And I had this experience actually this Monday, where I was having people over for dinner, and my apartment needed some tidying up. My regular Thumbtack cleaner was busy, and so I go on Thumbtack to find somebody to come that day. And this woman, Lucia, comes, and I meet to sort of give her the keys, and she walks right up to me, and she says, "Marco, thank you for saving my life." And that's something that really sets you back and puts you on your heels. And then she gives me this huge hug. And this woman was from Venezuela, which, as you probably know, has not had a good run of late. She had to leave with nothing. She came to this country with basically nothing, and with Thumbtack has been able to build this cleaning business. And now she supports her family here, a bunch of family back in Venezuela, and the pride that she had was just overwhelming. And so I feel the best when I hear these stories. And it really speaks to what we're going, and I really think to the power of technology. Too often technology is pitted as a substitute for labor, as a foe to workers. It's going to destroy jobs, and that will happen, and actually we should celebrate that because that's how we get more productive and ultimately wealthier as a society. But technology can also empower labor and can empower workers, and we as a platform are doing that, and there's certainly others as well. And when you see those two come together, where this woman who had the hustle and had the drive and had the sort of charisma to be a great company builder meets this platform that helped her solve this online marketing challenge, which she otherwise, I think, wouldn't have been able to do, and you put the two together and you can have real magic. And that's why we do it. That's why we get up.
So I'm sure there are young college students, engineering students here, undergraduates, who are saying, "I want to be him." What would you say to someone who says, "I want to be just like you"?
Get started. I think there is no one background that tells you that sort of is best for this path. I mean, you got to remember, Zuck was a psych major. Right? They've gussied it up as if he'd sort of taken a lot of tech classes, but he was a psych major. And there's no one thing you need to learn. There's no one experience you need to have. At the end of the day, you just have to want it. and you have to be excited about the process of learning how to sort of discover it and sort of develop it, and just get going. And actually, I think one of the things that makes me excited to come back and participate in these events is that Columbia is fostering more and more of that. So I'm not saying drop out of school and sort of just jump into the deep end, but find ways where you can begin to develop this passion, where you can meet other passionate people so that you can accelerate that process, and know that it is doable. I think the single biggest mistake people make is thinking that for whatever reason it is not doable, that they don't have what it takes, that they are not smart enough or have the right connections or whatever. Like, that is never the case. The people who succeed, I think the primary characteristic is grit and tenacity. And start building that muscle. Just go for it.
Thank you. So we don't have microphones here, but it's a small enough space. I'm actually going to open it up to questions. Hello.
Okay, so I'll start with a quote. One of my favorite quotes is actually from Steve Jobs, and he says, "In the first 30 years of your life, you make your habits, and in the second 30 years, your habits make you." Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask both Marco and Dean Tini for some habits.
Some habits. So I think one of the habits that has served me the best is I read a lot. I read a lot of books. I was reading a book on the plane over here about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So it's not like I'm reading about like Thumbtack and business. In fact, I don't really read very many business books. But I think you need to feed your curiosity to be an innovator and to sort of explore. And I think the best way to sort of hone that and sort of spark that is by reading what all these other incredible people over time have done and worked on. So yeah, I read a lot of books.
It's a good question. So I would say, I think that's probably an accurate description. I don't know if I'd put the transition point at age 30, but there is something. I would say in my own life, I developed a habit. I think that it's expressed in a way I've spoken to students, that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way to be engaged with really what you're doing, and not to think all the things that it might do, but to be fully engaged in life and to be open to every possibility. And that served me pretty well in life. I think I might have told you, I've told some students, I've never had a job in life I actually applied for. I have applied for jobs and sometimes been offered them, but I've never actually taken a job that I had literally applied for. And I think being open to possibilities is really important. Other questions? Over here.
Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for coming out today. It was great listening to your presentation. So I'm just curious, being an entrepreneur is super difficult, and sometimes self-doubt can creep in. So I was just wondering, how do you overcome self-doubt?
Tears. So doubt is absolutely part of it. And so I think what you have to begin to think about and reckon with is what's the source of your doubt. And this was actually really crystallized for me when we were raising our Series A in the fall of 2011, where we got rejected 42 times in a row before we got our first yes. That was very dispiriting, and obviously there was a lot of self-doubt. The interesting thing, though, is that I never lost faith about our idea or the potential of our business. I just lost faith in myself. The nice thing about that, though, is that is something that you can buttress with other people. And so in that moment, I realized that it's helpful to analyze what's causing your doubt. Is it the thing you are chasing you no longer believe in? Well, then you're going to have to pivot somehow, if that's truly true. Or is it you? Do you not think that you can do it? And for that, then it's all about having sort of a community around you that you can go to and talk to about that and can be supportive. But those tell you to do very different things, whether the doubt is about your idea or about yourself. And I think you just sort of have to confront it. But I think the best thing you can do is be surrounded by people who are going to be very honest with you. Because there may be a point where the right answer is for you to step aside, or for you to sort of give up something so that somebody else can do it. That's a fact of life. And the only way that you're going to be able to navigate that is if you have a group of people around you that you trust and respect enough to listen to and to hear from. And that is, I do not know how people start businesses by themselves. Maybe they're just better or tougher than I am, but I could not do it alone.
Right here.
Thanks. In the gig economy, when you were just starting out, how did you ensure safety and quality in the services that you were providing through the platform?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the thing that we did that was a little bit different is that we were not bringing sort of general labor to help with commodity services. Think delivery or sort of furniture assembly or pickup, things like that. We were instead helping customers hire professionals. The nice thing about professionals is that they tend to have a history on the internet or off the internet that sort of documents their professionalism. Maybe they have a license. Maybe they have reviews on some other website. Maybe they have a BBB listing that shows when they were incorporated. And so because we were sort of helping these pre-existing professionals, we could mine these signals to try and identify, who was good and who was not. Now, the reality is that is not perfect. And there's no way really to know exactly what somebody's going to be good at a priori. So the way that we thought about it is we sort of set the bar, and we make sure that the pros are who they say they are and they meet our definition of trustworthy and professional. But then the community actually is the one that rates them on their individual characteristics about what exactly they are good at. And we ourselves would never have the ability to do that. And so it's sort of emergent from all the reviews and data that we can collect and the systems that we can build. But it is something that is hard. And it's hard for products to identify who's good and what's bad. It's way harder for humans. And we as a marketplace facilitate the exchange of time for money. That fundamentally is what Thumbtack does. And that time is embedded in a professional, and it comes with their experience and knowledge and hard work and practice, and that is so nuanced and diverse that there is not one sort of 5-star rating that's going to encapsulate all about that. And so it's going to be one of these forever projects for us to really understand, who's good at what and why, and then matching the right customers to the right professionals.
There's a question over here.
Yeah, hey, Marco.
Hey.
You've talked a lot about culture, and you also just mentioned in your response to a question about surrounding yourself with people who are honest with you. And I'm curious how, when you're looking at your company and as it's grown and affecting the culture of your company, how you foster the same culture of openness with people among their colleagues, their direct reports, their managers, without going overboard to the point in which it creates a toxic kind of culture.
Yeah, how do we not become Bridgewater? So it is a fine line because I think you're right that taken too far it can almost become petty. But I think it just starts with mutual respect and hiring people who are humble enough and self-aware enough to admit when they're wrong. I think the biggest clashes comes when people dig their heels in and are unwilling to admit the possibility of error or mistake, and so become defensive to feedback. That starts with hiring the right people and then modeling the right behavior. So one thing that we did for a long time was we had a weekly sort of all-company meeting. We called it All Thumbs. And it would end with what we called love-its and could-be-betters. And the love-its, as you might expect, was an opportunity for me or anybody to thank somebody else for something that happened that week that probably went unnoticed. So it's Dean Valentini, thank you so much for taking the time to really write these great questions. Means a lot, and it really led to a great conversation. Just a simple thing that you can just sort of put out there to anyone in the room. But then we also would call out could-be-betters. And this is when you could basically own a fuck-up. And say, hey, this week I was meeting with a client. I thought I had loaded the latest presentation on my computer, but turns out I had the old one. It was incredibly embarrassing, and I unfortunately did not do as good a job as I could have for that client in that meeting. Could be better. And so you just create a culture where it's okay to admit mistakes, it's okay to call out the fact that you weren't perfect, and it's much more about owning that. That's the celebrated and important part, so that you can sort of get better and better. So there are these little things that I think cultures can do to support the right behavior, and that's what I mean by habits. That's a perfect example of a habit. Yeah, you have this value of making each other better, but how do you actually live it? At the end of the day, if it's just a poster on the wall, that's not going to do much for you.
Question right here.
Thank you so much for coming out. You mentioned that the most important characteristic for an entrepreneur is grit. And my question is that in a world with so many distractions, so many things kind of fighting for our attention, how do you maintain that vision, and how do you kind of remain focused on what your vision is and creating that as a reality?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is hard. So I think a couple things is, one is turn off push notifications. You don't want to be distracted by the world? Don't let them into your world. You be deliberate about when you go and check your messages. Don't let somebody grab your attention. I think the other thing that has worked for me is writing down what matters. There's the tyranny of the urgent but unimportant that comes to dominate your life that you really have to fight against. And you have to be able to have something to look back on. And I literally just email myself every week the things that I think are important for that week. And I just have it in my inbox and I can look at it. It's like not a very sophisticated system, but it's there and I can look at it. And that gives me something to go back to, because you'll find yourself, you're like, all right, I have 90 minutes between now and my next meeting. What should I do? A natural thing is just start plodding through email. But the reality is, like, most of those emails can wait, and some are actually just not important at all. And having that list of 2, 3, sometimes 4 things gives you the clarity to be like, okay, actually, great, I have 90 minutes. It's time to go back and read those 2 documents, provide comments, and whatever, right? So that is something that I've found to be helpful. But yeah, focus, I think, is something that is just fundamental to making progress.
Question here.
Hi. Thought this is great. Quick side question would be, if you want to deal with it, is to use something like Slackware, et cetera. But the main question that I had addressed to both of you is, all this stuff on entrepreneurialism is great. I love it. More the merrier. But I was curious how, especially as a dean and then also as a former student here and founder of a company, do you think other subjects, I don't know, pick one, science, math, whatever, philosophy, the other things that are taught here at Columbia, or so rumor has it, how do you think they should fit in?
I mean, I think they fit in great. I think the reality is nothing you're going to learn in college is actually going to make you better or worse at being an entrepreneur. No, I'm serious. And it's not like Stanford has better classes or MIT has better classes. This has nothing to do with the coursework, I think, personally. At the end of the day, the internet has the best entrepreneurial coursework you could ever ask for. And if you want to go learn stuff, there are blogs and Twitter feeds and tons of places to go learn from. So I really believe in the liberal arts education, that learning how to think, learning how to read, learning how to craft an argument, learning how to develop a hypothesis and test it, those are actually the most important skills and will help you in whatever you want to do. And I think they'll help you be a better entrepreneur, and they'll help you be a better scientist or whatever you end up doing. But I think the question presupposes that there's a specific set of skills that makes for a good entrepreneur, and I do not agree with that premise.
Dean Valentini, we have time for one last question.
Yes, right here.
Thank you. So my question was, how can startups reach gender parity, and what are you doing in your organization to ensure that there's gender parity throughout, from your board all the way through the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hard
you.
one. I wish I had an answer. The truth is, I do not have a perfect answer. I think first and foremost, it starts about caring about it and talking about it and engaging with it. And so, we look at it, and Thumbtack is actually lucky to be, probably 55-45 when you look across our 2 offices, so not too far. Obviously, within engineering, it's more like 80-20, which is unfortunately more common. And so you have to work hard at it. I wish I had a better answer than simply that. You look at a company like Google and Facebook, and like they haven't been able to crack it. So I don't know what the magic is. I think the best thing I've found internally is highlighting successful examples of leaders who are women, who are men, people of color. Just to see that and to support it and celebrate it provides, I think, a lot of support for people who are there and inspiration for others who may not be in the business. But I think our industry as a whole has not figured out how to address this challenge. I think the good thing is that people are talking about it a lot more. I think there is a real dialogue happening in Silicon Valley about this. And that doesn't necessarily mean we will succeed, but it's the start. And hopefully that provides a little bit of hope.
Thank you. Marco, thank you for coming. Marco came to New York specifically for this. He's only going to be here about 18 hours and turn around, and it's a time in his life when his wife's about to have a baby. It's a very important time. I want to thank him for coming here, thank him for this interview.
Thanks for having me.